"I'd not waste a season on her," said the Duke of Ashcombe, and the hothouse lilies between them did nothing to soften it, and Verity Colborne, straightening her aunt's dropped shawl not 4 feet beyond the leaves, went very still, the way a woman goes still when a carriage wheel has just missed her foot. She did not gasp. She had trained herself, over 25 years of being poor in rich houses, never to gasp where it could be heard. She would remember the sentence longest of anything spoken to her that year, though she did not yet know that the falseness in it belonged to the coin's face and not to the hand that had struck it, or that the man who had struck it would spend every season afterward trying to take the words back one at a time, like a debt paid in coin too small to matter and too many to refuse. Lady Harwick's ballroom went on breathing around her, the fiddles, the heat, the particular ringing laugh of Miss Selina Marlowe 2 rooms distant, and Verity smoothed the seam of her left glove, thumb along the stitching, the small private gesture she used when the room required more composure than she owned. 3 weeks, she thought, because the number had lodged itself in her that very evening along with the insult, 3 weeks until Michaelmas, when the Ashcombe accounts would be laid before the trustees, and, if the whispers in every doorway were to be believed, the Ashcombe betrothal announced beside them. She did not know yet that the same 3 weeks would be spent unlocking a box her father had pressed into her hands the week before he died. Had she known, she would have opened the door on that ballroom all the same. "There you are," said a voice at her elbow, dry as a biscuit left too long in a tin, and Verity turned to find her great-aunt regarding her over the rim of a lorgnette with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has just watched someone else be insulted and is pleased, on the whole, that it was not her. "You've gone the colour of a boiled trout, my dear. Sit down before you fall down, and tell me which duke has been rude to you, so that I may despise him properly at supper." "It hardly matters," Verity said, and heard how unconvincing she sounded even to herself. "It matters enormously," said Lady Marchmont, snapping her fan shut with a report like a pistol. "A woman who says a thing hardly matters is a woman rehearsing how she will lie about it tomorrow. Was it the Ashcombe man? He has the look of someone who says unforgivable things in a very pleasant voice. He did not know I could hear him. That, said her aunt, is very often how the worst things get said. Come, there is lemonade that has not yet been ruined by the punch bowl, and you may tell me nothing at all while I guess everything correctly. It was, Verity reflected afterward, the first mercy of that evening, and very nearly the only one. She had not come to Lady Harwick's ball to be looked at. She had come because her aunt could not manage the stairs alone and would not admit it, and because a companion's chief duty, beyond accounts and correspondence and the management of an old woman's temper, was to be present and unremarkable, a piece of furniture that occasionally fetched a shawl. She had made a study of not being seen. It was, she sometimes thought, the only inheritance her father had left her besides his eye for a false hand of writing. The two gifts arriving together, as though invisibility and precision were simply the twin halves of the same wound. Thomas Colborne had been a bank clerk of unimpeachable neatness and unfashionable honesty, the kind of man who balanced his columns twice before supper and again after, and he had died 5 years before in the debtor's ward of a gaol in the north, convicted of embezzling £1,100 from the very institution he had served for 2 decades, a sum he had never in his life possessed, and could not, on his clerk's wages, have hidden if he had. Verity had been 19. She had sat beside his narrow bed in that ward, with the smell of tallow and damp stone thick in her throat. and he had pressed a small rosewood box into her hands, brass-cornered, its lid closed with a puzzle lock rather than a key, and he had said, in the last clear voice he ever used with her, "The hand does not lie. Verity, only the man holding the pen, when you have proof enough to be believed, not before." She had carried that box through 6 changes of lodging and 3 positions as a governess before her aunt, out of family duty rather than affection, had taken her in as companion. She had never gotten the box open. She had never, in 5 years, stopped trying. And so when the Duke of Ashcombe's flat, unhurried voice reached her through a hedge of hothouse lilies and pronounced her not worth a season, she absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, filed it, dated it, and did not let her face report the cost. What she could not have known, standing there in her sensible grey, with the lemonade going warm in her hand, was that in exactly 3 weeks the Ashcombe steward would present the estate's accounts to a room full of trustees, that among those trustees would sit a man who had once signed the order that sent her father to the debtor's ward, and that the same box she had failed for 5 years to open contained, in her father's small exact hand, the only proof in England that he had never held the pen that ruined him at all. The Duke of Ashcombe did not attend Lady Harwick's ball again that season, which surprised no one, since he was known to attend as few of them as duty allowed. What surprised the household at Faramir considerably more was the note that arrived at Lady Marchmont's townhouse 4 days later, addressed not to the Countess but to Miss Colborne directly, in a hand so controlled it looked engraved. He required, the note said, a person of discretion and a trained eye to set the Faramir library and estate papers in order before Michaelmas, his late brother having left them in a state he termed, with what Verity would come to recognise as characteristic understatement, imperfect. He understood Miss Colborne's father had been a man of figures. He understood, further, that Miss Colborne herself had a reputation, quietly circulated among 3 households she had served, for reading a false entry the way other women read weather. He proposed a wage of £40 for the 3 weeks' work, and no more familiarity than the work required. He proposes, said Lady Marchmont, reading over Verity's shoulder with evident relish, to hire the woman he would not waste a season on. There is either a great stupidity in that man, or a great deal more going on behind his face than he lets show, and I have never yet met a duke stupid enough to insult a lady in a doorway loud enough to be overheard. Doorways carry, my girl. Any fool who has ever gossiped in one knows it. Then perhaps he is not a fool, Verity said, folding the letter along its crease with more care than it required, and meant to be overheard. By whom, I wonder? I could not say. You could, said her aunt, but you won't, which tells me you've already begun guessing and don't like where the guess leads. Go and take the position. £40 is £40, and I have wanted an excuse to see Faramir's library since before your mother was born. The old Duke's father had a set of accounts ledgers going back to the 2nd George, and I have always suspected there is more truth in an estate's ledgers than in its Bible. She arrived at Faramir on a grey morning with her father's rosewood box wrapped in a shawl at the bottom of her trunk, and was shown not to a housekeeper's parlour, but to the Duke's own study, where he stood behind a desk stacked with account books in towers that looked less like negligence than like a man who did not know which tower to trust. He was larger than she had allowed herself to remember from the ballroom, and stiller, with the particular quality of stillness she associated with men holding something very heavy without letting their arms shake. Miss Colborne, he said, and did not offer his hand, only a chair. You will forgive me for coming directly to terms. I have 3 weeks and a library that has not been honestly kept since my brother's death, and I am told you can read a hand of writing the way another man reads a face. I can, she said, and did not soften it with a courtesy. Because she had decided, somewhere on the road from London, that she would not perform gratitude for a man who had called her not worth a season within her own hearing. Then we understand one another. I want the estate books set right before my Michaelmas, when they go before the trustees. I want no gossip carried from this room to any other. And I want to know, before we begin, whether you heard what I said of you at Lady Harwick's, because I would rather have the discomfort now than have it curdle for 3 weeks in a library. Verity looked at him for a long moment, the way she looked at a column of figures that did not sum. I heard it, she said. Then you will understand, he said, that I do not intend to explain it, and that this offends you, and that I have made my peace with being offensive in service of things I cannot yet say aloud. That is a very handsome way of telling a woman you will insult her again and expect her thanks for it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, gone before it could be called one. I did not expect thanks, I expected refusal. You have surprised me by staying in the chair. £40, she said, buys a great deal of surprise, your grace. So I am learning. He set both hands flat on the desk, and she noticed then what she would notice 100 times in the weeks to come, that his hands did not belong to the rest of him, roughened at the first knuckle, a thin white scar across the base of the right thumb, hands that had done work no duke's hands were meant to do. The terms are these. You will have the run of the library and the estate room. You will report anomalies to me and to no one else, not my steward, not my housekeeper, not my aunt by marriage, who visits Thursdays and repeats everything by Friday. In return I will pay you on the day, not at the quarter, and I will not ask you to account for your father, whom I understand died disgraced, because a man's disgrace is very often someone else's arithmetic. Verity's hand went still on the arm of the chair. You know of my father. I make it my business to know who I am hiring, he said, without apology, and I do not believe everything a court believes. Do we have terms, Miss Colborne? We have terms, she said, and it was only much later, turning the exchange over the way she turned every exchange, that she understood he had told her. In the space of 10 minutes, and without once saying so, that he already suspected the very fraud she had spent 5 years trying to prove. Mr. Alaric Vane came to the library on her 3rd morning, and she knew him before he was named, by the scent that arrived a full breath ahead of him, orange flower water. Too sweet for a man who spent his days among ledgers, the kind of scent a man wears when he wishes to be remembered as delicate rather than exact. He was cousin to the Duke, she had been told, and had managed the Faramir accounts since the old Duke's time, first under the elder brother and now, by grace of long habit and longer usefulness, under the younger. He was beautiful in the particular way of men who have spent money on being beautiful, immaculate to the cuff, and he smiled at her the way a cat regards a bird it has not yet decided is worth the trouble of catching. So you are the young person set to audit my work, he said, and there was nothing in the words themselves that a listener could have objected to, only in the softness with which he said them, a softness Verity had learned, in 5 years of watching gentlemen speak to servants, and to each other, to distrust more than any shout. I am set to catalogue the library, and set the estate papers in order, Verity said. Whether that touches your work at all, I could not say until I have seen it. How diplomatic. Your father was a bank clerk, I understand. The pause before it was so small that a less practised ear would have missed it entirely, Verity did not miss it. He was, she said, and did not elaborate, because she had learned that elaboration was a door, and this man, she suspected, was the kind who came in through open doors uninvited. A sad business, that, trust misplaced, is always the sadder for how ordinary it looks beforehand. He straightened the signet ring on his smallest finger, a small unconscious motion she filed away, without knowing yet what it would come to mean. "I hope you will not take it amiss, Miss Colborne, if I say that his Grace is unused to strangers in his affairs, and that the estate has run very smoothly under arrangements made before your arrival. I would hate for enthusiasm to be mistaken for interference. I have been hired to find anomalies. Mr. Vain I intend to find them, if there are any to find." "Naturally," he said, smiling with all his teeth and none of his eyes. "There are none." He left a trail of orange flower water behind him that lingered in the library for an hour, and it was under that lingering scent, 2 days later, that Verity found the first thread worth pulling, a rent entry for the home farm, dated the previous Lady Day, in an ink that had not fully dried into the same brown as its neighbours, a colour perhaps 3 shades too fresh for a page 18 months old. She sat with it a long while, turning the page to the window light, and thought of her father's voice in the debtor's ward. The hand does not lie. Only the man holding the pen. Below stairs the household had already begun to talk, as households will, about the plain companion the Duke had brought in under a wage instead of a chaperone, and about what it might mean that a man who had sworn off a season's worth of eligible women in one careless sentence at Lady Harwick's now spent his evenings in the library long after the accounts should have been closed for the night. Mrs. Fetterplace the housekeeper took bets in the servants' hall, quietly, on whether Miss Colborne would last the fortnight, the wagering book, kept in a broken-spined receipt ledger nobody thought to miss, ran 3-1 against her by the end of the first week, and would, by the story's end, be the subject of a great deal of good-natured settling up. None of it reached Verity directly. What reached her instead, on the 9th evening, was the Duke himself, standing in the library doorway with his coat off and his sleeves turned back, smelling of cedar shavings and the sharp clean bite of metal polish, an odd combination she would come, in time, to think of as simply the smell of him. "You have found something," he said. It was not a question, and she understood then that he read faces nearly as well as she read hands, which she found, against her own better judgment, unsettling in a manner that had nothing to do with fear. "I have found an entry that troubles me," Verity said, "and I do not yet know whether it troubles me because it is wrong, or because I want it to be wrong, which is a different failing entirely, and one my father warned me against more than any other." The Duke came further into the room and stood at the far side of the reading table, not crowding her, which she noted and was grateful for without saying so. "Show me." She turned the ledger to him and set her thumbnail beneath the entry, the rent for the home farm, dated 18 months past in ink that caught the candlelight wrong. "Paper yellows evenly, your Grace, and ink settles into it as it dries, darkest first, then fading true over years, the way a bruise fades. This entry is dated with its neighbours, but coloured like last month's rain. Either someone re-inked a smudge for tidiness, which is innocent, or someone wrote this line long after the line beside it, which is not. And which do you believe?" "I believe," she said, "that I have not yet earned the right to accuse a man in this house of anything, and that I would rather be thought slow than be thought wrong." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face eased, fractionally, the way a held breath eases without quite becoming a laugh. My brother used to say the same of horses. Never accuse a beast of shying at nothing. There is always something, even if you cannot see it from the saddle. Your brother sounds as though he understood ledgers better than most men understand horses. He understood horses considerably better than he understood ledgers, the Duke said, and there, for the first time since she had known him, something that was unmistakably a laugh, short and surprised out of him, as though it had escaped custody, gone almost before it landed. Verity found she had marked the moment the way she marked an ink colour, filed and dated, before she had decided whether she meant to. He left the books to Vane the year I went into the army, and never looked at them again, God keep him, because he trusted the man the way he trusted his own hands. I did the same for 2 years after he died, out of grief more than trust, if I am honest, because I could not bear to sit in this room and reckon what he had left undone. And now? Now I sit in this room most nights instead of sleeping, Miss Colborne, turning old locks over in my hands, because it is easier than turning over the accounts, and I have hired a woman with a trained eye and a father who died for exactly the kind of fraud I am afraid to find in my own house. He said it plainly, without drama, the way a man states a debt rather than confesses a sin, and Verity understood that this was as close as he meant to come, that night, to explaining the doorway at Lady Harwick's. "There is a thing I have not yet told you," she said, before she had entirely decided to say it, and drew from beneath her shawl the rosewood box. Brass at its corners, its puzzle lock catching the candlelight the way old brass does, dulled and warm. "My father gave me this the week he died. He said the truth of what happened to him was inside it, and that I was not to open it, or show it, until I had proof enough to be believed alongside it. I have never managed to open it. I do not know its mechanism, only that it is not a common lock, and that I have tried for 5 years without result." The Duke took the box from her with both hands, careful as a man handling a nesting bird, and turned it slowly in the candlelight, the scarred pad of his thumb, finding the seam of the lid without seeming to search for it. "May I? You may try. Everyone has tried. Not everyone restores old locks for a living. In the hours a duke is not meant to have," he said, and there was the ghost of the laugh again, closer to the surface this time. "This is continental work, I think, a maker's puzzle, not a keyed lock at all. It wants to be turned in a sequence, not picked. I would not force it tonight. A wrong turn on an old spring can seize the mechanism forever, and then no proof in England will get it open. But I believe I can learn it, given time, and a workshop, and your patience. You would do that." "I would do considerably more than that," he said, and set the box down between them with a gentleness that made her chest ache in a way she declined, that night, to examine. "I will not pretend to you, Miss Colborne, that I brought you into this house purely for your eye. I had heard your father's name before I ever heard yours, in papers I have not yet shown you. Papers Vane keeps under his own hand, and no others. I did not know, when I wrote to you, whether I was hiring an instrument of proof or walking a grieving woman into a house that might do her further harm. I am still not entirely certain which. I ask you to trust me a little longer regardless, though I have given you very poor cause." "You called me not worth a season," she said, quietly, in a doorway loud enough to be heard. "I did," he said, and did not look away from her. "It was the ugliest thing I have said in a year, and I will not defend it to you tonight, because the defence is not yet mine to give. I will only tell you this much. I did not say it, because I believed it. The wren that nested above the library window disturbed by some small night movement, gave one clear falling call into the dark outside, and neither of them remarked on it, though Verity would remember, afterward, that it was the first time she had heard it sing after sundown. The blow came 11 days into her 3 weeks, on a morning bright enough that no one expected trouble in it, which was, Verity thought later, precisely why it had been chosen. She had risen early to compare the home farm ledger against the bank's own quarterly statements, borrowed with Sir Josiah Bellamy's grudging permission from the county bank where her father had once clerked, and where Sir Josiah now sat as senior trustee, and she had left both books open on the library table when Lady Marchmont's Thursday visiting aunt arrived early and swept the household into her, flurry that pulled her from the room for the better part of an hour. When she returned, Mr. Vane was standing at the table with the borrowed bank statement in his immaculate hand, and his face wore an expression of sorrowful discovery so exact it might have been rehearsed, because, as she would learn within the week, it had been. "Miss Colborne," he said, in the gentlest voice she had yet heard him use, which was how she knew, before he said another word, that whatever followed would be the worst thing he had done to her yet. "I confess I do not know how to say this kindly, so I will simply say it. This statement bears an alteration in the 3rd column, a figure changed from a 4 to a 9, in an ink that does not match its neighbours, the very sort of anomaly you have spent a fortnight teaching this household to fear. I would not have thought it my place to examine your papers, but Mrs. Fetterplace found the books left open and unattended in a house presently very anxious about its accounts, and brought them to me out of proper caution. That figure is not altered," Verity said, and heard the steadiness in her own voice even as her pulse climbed. "I have not touched that page since I copied it from the bank's own record 2 days ago. I am sure you believe that. I do not believe it, Mr. Vane. I know it, the way I know the colour of my own hand. The trouble," he said, setting the statement down with the care of a man laying out evidence rather than accusation, though it amounted, in the room, to precisely the same thing, is that a trained eye is a formidable thing in either direction. A woman who can detect a false hand is also, by the same token, a woman uniquely equipped to produce one, and forgive me, but a daughter's loyalty is a powerful engine. Your father's case was decided by men far more expert than I am, on evidence gathered by the bank itself. It would grieve me more than I can say to think his daughter had come into this house not to find a fraud, but to manufacture one, in service of clearing a name that a court of law already judged. The word landed exactly where he had aimed it, and Verity felt the room narrow, the way it had narrowed the night her father was sentenced, every face in it suddenly a face deciding what to believe of her before she had spoken a single word in her own defence. "It runs in families, you understand," Vane went on, softer still, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted it. Not the crime, precisely, the talent for it. By evening the story had travelled the length of the house, and out the servants' door besides, embroidered at every stop, until it arrived in the village as an established fact that the Duke's plain companion had been caught altering the Ashcombe books to hide her own father's guilt, or to invent some fresh scandal to trap a duke, depending on which version one heard. And Miss Selina Marlowe, calling that same afternoon with her father and a great deal of correct sympathy for the household's distress, managed to convey, without once saying an unkind word aloud, that she had known all along a companion with no fortune, and a convict's name could not be trusted so near a duke's papers. The Duke said nothing to contradict any of it in the room, which Verity understood, with a coldness that frightened her more than Vane's softness had, might mean he believed the same. What she did not yet understand, standing alone in the library that night, with her father's box clutched against her ribs, and the ink-stained page burning behind her eyes, was that the asset that had made her indispensable to this house, the very eye trained by her father's ruin, had just been turned with surgical precision into the weapon that would very nearly undo her. He found her an hour after midnight, still in the library, the candles guttered low, and she did not turn when the door opened, because she had already decided, in the space of that terrible afternoon, that she would not beg any man in this house to believe her. "You said nothing," she said, to the window, rather than to him. In the drawing-room, when he named my father a thief and me a forger in the same breath, and Miss Marlowe agreed with her eyes if not her mouth, you said nothing at all. I said nothing, the Duke agreed, because the only thing I could have said with honesty was that I did not yet have the proof to say it, and a duke's defence without proof is worth less than a servant's, in a room already primed to believe the worst story. I have learned that the hard way, Miss Colborne, and I did not want to spend your defence before I had the coin to make it stick. That is a very tidy piece of arithmetic for a man watching a woman be ruined in his own house. It is, he said, and did not defend it further, which she found, against her anger, harder to hate him for than if he had argued. I went instead to Vane's own strong-room tonight, while the house slept, and found nothing, because he is not a fool, and would not leave evidence where a suspicious duke might look the very night he had cause to look. I found instead that the strong-box key he carries does not match the strong-box lock, which means he keeps a second box somewhere else entirely, and I mean to find it before Michaelmas if I have to take this house apart floorboard by floorboard. Why, she said, turning at last to face him, does any of that matter to you, if you mean to let Selina Marlowe's father settle your accounts, and Selina Marlowe herself sit at the head of your table by Michaelmas regardless? I have heard the terms of it, your grace. Everyone in the county has heard them. A wealthy match to cover whatever Vane has taken. You need not pretend the arithmetic does not run that direction. Something closed in his face, briefly, the way a door closes against wind. Mr. Marlowe came to me a week past, he said, with an offer to settle the estate's debts in exchange for a betrothal announced at Michaelmas, and I told him I would consider it, because considering it bought me 3 weeks in which no one, not Marlowe, not Vane, not the trustees, would look too closely at what I was actually doing in this library, which was finding the man who has been robbing this house since before my brother died. I did not tell you, because you had trouble enough of your own, and because I did not want you weighing your worth in this house against a bargain I never meant to keep. You might have told me. I might have, he said. I did not, and I am telling you now that it was a failure of nerve rather than of trust, which is a distinction that will not comfort you tonight, and which I do not ask you to forgive yet. Mr. Marlowe himself called on her 2 mornings later, alone, with an offer so plainly a bribe that he did not trouble to disguise it as anything else, a position as companion to a cousin in Bath, a settlement of £30 a year, quietly paid, in exchange for Miss Colborne's early and unremarked departure from Faramare, before Michaelmas, before, as he put it, matters became more uncomfortable for everyone concerned. You are asking me to take money for leaving quietly while a man robs this house and blackens my father's grave in the doing, Verity said, and did not raise her voice, because she had learned long ago that a raised voice was the first thing men like Marlowe used against a woman afterward. I am offering you a graceful exit from a scandal that will otherwise attach to your name for good, Marlowe said. £30 is not nothing to a woman in your position. My position, she said, is the only thing in this house I have never once falsified, Mr. Marlowe, and I will not sell it to you for £30 or 300. She refused him with her hands folded and her voice level, and it cost her, within the week, nearly everything she had left. Lady Marchmont's household, unwilling to weather further gossip, gave notice that Verity's position as companion could not continue past the month. The Duke, bound by his own unfinished proof, could offer her no post at Farrowmere that would not confirm every rumour Vane had planted. She left the estate on a wet Tuesday with her trunk, her father's box, and 11 days left before Michaelmas, uncertain, for the first time in 5 years, whether she had spent her integrity on a debt that would ever be repaid. She took a single room above a chandler's shop in the village, paid for out of the last of her own small savings, and told herself she would not weep over it. And did not, quite, though the effort cost her most of that first night. It was there, on the 4th morning of her exile, that a boy from the posting inn brought a letter sealed with the bank's own mark, addressed in a hand she recognised at once as Sir Josiah Bellamy's, cramped and careful, and, for the first time in 5 years, not entirely closed against her. He had been turning old papers, the letter said, since her strange and specific questions about ink and dates had unsettled a certainty he had carried, unexamined, for 5 years he had found, in the bank's own retained correspondence, a memorandum in Mr. Alaric Vane's hand, written the year before her father's trial, requesting an advance against future salary that the bank's partners had refused, a debt and a motive that had never once been raised at Thomas Colborne's trial, because no one had thought to ask whether the accuser might himself have needed the money more than the accused. Sir Josiah would attend the Michaelmas audit at Farrowmere in 11 days as he always did. If Miss Colborne had proof to lay beside his own, he wrote, he would hear it there, before the full board of trustees, and not before. Because a private word from an old man's conscience was worth nothing against a public record, and only a public record could undo one. Verity read the letter twice, then a third time, and found her hands, for once, entirely steady. She had proof of motive now, in Sir Josiah's careful hand. She had a colour of ink that did not match its neighbours. She had, above all, her father's rosewood box, still sealed, still silent, sitting on the narrow shelf of her rented room like a held breath, and 11 days in which to learn what her father had trusted it to say. She did not know, sending her answer back with the same boy that afternoon, whether the Duke of Ashcombe had found Vane's second strong-box, or whether he had abandoned the search entirely under the pressure of a betrothal he had once claimed he never meant to honour. She had not heard from him since the night she left. The wet Tuesday had closed over Farrowmere like water over a dropped stone, and she was, for the first time since her father's death, entirely and coldly alone with the question that had shaped her whole adult life, whether the truth, once finally in her hands, would be believed a single hour sooner than it had been believed the first time. The knock came at dusk on the 9th day, 3 sharp raps, and then, oddly, a 4th, softer, as though the hand delivering it had hesitated halfway through its own certainty, and when Verity opened the door it was not the Duke standing in the chandler's stairwell but Lady Marchmont, cane in one hand and, tucked beneath the other arm, wrapped in oilcloth against the rain. A second and considerably larger box than the one already on Verity's shelf. Well, said her aunt, sweeping past her into the room without waiting to be asked. "You will want to sit down, and so, frankly, will I, because I have spent the better part of a week doing something I have not done since I was 30, which is climbing out a scullery window. Aunt, do not aunt me in that tone. I am not finished. That wretched vain creature searched this house top to bottom the very morning after you left it, ostensibly for missing silver, though I have never in my life met a man less interested in silver, and I do not care for men who search other people's houses under false pretences while smiling the whole time, as though they were doing us all a kindness. So I searched the strong room myself before he thought to lock it, being an old woman whom nobody in that house has thought worth watching in 30 years, which I have found, on the whole, to be the most useful thing about being an old woman. I found this beneath a false bottom in his travelling desk, and I have been sitting on it, quite literally on some evenings, ever since, waiting for you to have somewhere safe to put it." Verity took the second box with hands that were not, this time, entirely steady, and found within it a ledger in a hand she knew at once was younger than Vane's current careful forgeries, rougher, more honest in its very unsteadiness, a private accounting, kept by Vane himself years before, of sums borrowed against the estate and never repaid. The same figures she saw as she turned the pages by candlelight that appeared in the doctored bank statement that had nearly ruined her, matched now not by suspicion, but by his own hand, his own dates, his own arithmetic laid bare against itself. "There is more," said Lady Marchmont, more gently than Verity had heard her speak in 5 years of acquaintance. "The Duke has been 3 days and nights in that workshop of his, not sleeping, by the housekeeper's account, working at your father's box with a set of picks so fine I could not see them across the room. He sent no word because he swore he would send none until he had it open, having some notion, I gather, that a promise half kept was worse than no promise at all. He is a very stubborn man, my dear, and very much in love with you, and I would not tell you the second part except that stubborn men in love are prone to dying of pride before they say so themselves, and I have buried enough men of pride to have no patience left for the pattern." Verity said nothing for a long moment, turning Vane's own damning ledger over in her hands, and outside the small window the last light was going out of the sky over rooftops she did not know, in a village she had not chosen, holding proof she had waited 5 years to hold, and had somehow, in the holding, not yet decided how to feel. "Sir Josiah will be at Faramir in 2 days," she said at last. "For the audit. Then we shall be there also," said Lady Marchmont, snapping her fan shut with the report of a small pistol. "I did not climb out a scullery window at my age to hand a duke his proof and then sit home with my tea while the tribunal happens without me. Fetch your bonnet, Verity, and bring both boxes. A story wants its whole evidence laid out together, or it is not a story at all, merely an accusation. And accusations, in my long experience, convince no one who was not already convinced." The library at Faramir had never held so many people at once in its ordinary use, and Verity, standing at the edge of the room, with both boxes on the reading table before her, and Lady Marchmont's hand a steadying weight at her elbow, thought it looked less like a library that morning than like a courtroom that had forgotten to change its furniture. Sir Josiah Bellamy sat at the head of the table with the trustees' ledgers before him and his spectacles, polished twice already, though the morning was barely an hour old, perched on the end of his nose. Mr. Marlowe and his daughter had come, expecting a betrothal to be settled alongside the accounts, and Selina Marlowe sat very straight in her chair, with the particular brittleness of a woman who suspects, without yet knowing why, that the ground beneath her has already shifted. Mr. Vane stood near the window in a coat cut as immaculately as ever, and it was only Verity, watching with the eye her father had trained, who saw that his hand went twice in as many minutes to the signet ring on his smallest finger, turning it, a tell she had catalogued weeks ago, and understood, only now, was not vanity at all, but the oldest fear a man can carry, worn thin with handling. The Duke of Ashcombe stood at the table centre, and when Verity entered the room his eyes found hers first, before Sir Josiah's, before the trustees, and held there a moment longer than propriety required, though no one but Lady Marchmont seemed to notice. And she noticed everything. "Your Grace," Sir Josiah began, "we are come to review the Faramir accounts, as is customary at Michaelmas, and I understand there is some other matter you wish to lay before us first." "There is," the Duke said, and his voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of the room the way a struck bell carries, without needing to be raised. 3 weeks ago I hired Miss Verity Colborne to set this library and these accounts in order, because I had begun to suspect what I could not yet prove, that the man who has managed this estate since before my brother's death has been managing it for his own profit rather than mine. I did not act on suspicion alone, because a duke's word without proof ruins the innocent as easily as the guilty, and I have seen what an unproven accusation costs a good name. I have proof now." He set Verity's father's rosewood box on the table, its brass corners catching the morning light through the tall windows, and beside it Vane's own private ledger, retrieved, he said, from a false bottom in a travelling desk by a lady whose name he would not give unless she wished it given herself, at which Lady Marchmont said, with enormous satisfaction, "Given, and gladly." And several of the trustees suppressed smiles despite the gravity of the room. "This box," the Duke went on, "belonged to Thomas Colborne, a bank clerk convicted 5 years past of embezzling £1,100 he never held. His daughter has carried it, unopened, for 5 years, on his own instruction, until she had proof enough to be believed beside it. I have spent 3 sleepless nights learning its mechanism, because I would not force a dead man's lock and lose what truth it held to a broken spring." He set his scarred thumb to the seam of the lid, turned it once, twice, a third time in a sequence Verity had watched him practice 100 times on lesser locks in his workshop, and the box opened with a small clean sound, like a held breath finally let go. Inside lay a slim duplicate ledger in her father's own careful hand, kept privately, dated the very months before his trial, recording sums advanced against the bank's reserve to a junior clerk, not yet promoted to the name he wore now, sums matching, column for column, date for date, the very entries in Vane's own private book that Lady Marchmont had carried out of a scullery window. "The hand does not lie," Verity said, stepping forward at last, her voice steadier than she had believed it could be. "Only the man holding the pen. My father wrote that to me the week he died, and I did not understand until this morning that he meant it not as comfort, but as instruction. Compare the hand in this duplicate ledger, kept in secret by a dying man who suspected he was about to be blamed for another man's debts, against the hand in this private book taken from Mr. Vane's own desk. They are the same figures, in 2 different men's writing, describing the same theft, 5 years apart. My father did not embezzle £1,100 from that bank, Sir Josiah. He discovered that someone else had, and was silenced for it before he could bring the proof to light. I believe you signed the order that silenced him. The room had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight, and it was into that quiet that Sir Josiah Bellamy turning the pages with hands that trembled slightly now, said, "I signed it on evidence presented to me as complete. I have spent 9 days since Miss Colborne first questioned me, wondering whether it was complete at all. I do not wonder any longer." Mr. Vane had gone very pale, the orange flower water suddenly cloying in a room that had turned entirely against him, and he opened his mouth to speak, some smooth denial already forming, when a thin, nervous voice from the doorway said, "It's true," and every head in the room turned to find Mr. Pruitt, the estate's under-steward, wringing his hat in both hands, with the particular misery of a small man caught between two large fears. "Pruitt," Vane said, and there was, for the first time since Verity had known him, a crack in the softness of his voice, a genuine and ugly fright beneath it. "Say nothing further. I've kept your second books 8 years, Mr. Vane," Pruitt said, not looking at him, looking instead at Sir Josiah, as though the trustee's spectacles were the only safe harbour in the room, copying entries you gave me, telling myself it was just tidying, just correcting, because you always said it was correcting, and I was glad of the extra £0.5 a month, and didn't ask what it corrected toward. But I'll not stand here and let a dead man's daughter be called a forger for telling the truth I've known for 8 years, and been too frightened to tell myself. "One question," the Duke said quietly, before Vane could recover his voice, and it was, Verity understood, the single question the whole 3 weeks had been built toward. Whose hand wrote the altered figure in the bank statement Miss Colborne was accused of forging? Yours, Pruitt, or Mr. Vane's own? Pruitt's hat stopped turning in his hands. "Mine," he said so quietly it barely reached the back of the room. On his instruction. He said it would end her poking about for good. Vane's composure, immaculate through every long moment before it, broke at last not into anger but into something smaller and sadder, a man's face when the last excuse has been taken from him. And he sat unbidden, in the nearest chair, the signet ring still turning uselessly between his fingers. "My mother nursed the last of her illness in a rented room no better than a stable," he said, "to no one in particular, or perhaps to all of them, while your family, Julian, kept 4 houses standing empty half the year. I was born a heart in every way that mattered except the one the law would recognise, and I watched a legitimate son who never once opened his own account books inherit everything, while I balanced them for him, and was thanked with a wage a groom would have scorned. I took the first sum to pay for her doctor. I told myself I would return it. I did not, and then I could not, and Thomas Colborne found the difference before I could hide it a second time, and I let him hang for my arithmetic, because I did not know, at 30, how to be poor again." No one in the room spoke for a long moment, and Verity, looking at him, really looking, the way her father had taught her to look at a thing before judging it, felt something in her chest that was not quite forgiveness and not quite triumph, but stood somewhere honest between the two. "You will make full restitution of every sum recorded in both these ledgers," the Duke said at last to the estate, and a formal statement to Sir Josiah's board clearing Thomas Colborne's name beyond any further question. "You will leave England within the month for the Cape, where I have a cousin who will find you clerk's work suited to your talents and no others, and you will receive an allowance sufficient to live without want, and not 1 shilling beyond it. I will bring no charge against you, not for your sake, but because a trial would drag Miss Colborne's father's name through the same mud a second time, and I will not spend her peace to purchase your punishment." "That is more mercy than I have earned," Vane said, and for once there was no softness performed in it at all. "It is not earned," the Duke agreed. "It is given. There is a difference, and I have only lately learned it myself. Miss Pruitt, weeping openly now with relief, was given a lesser sentence of honest labour and Sir Josiah's personal recommendation to a bank 2 counties distant, where a man might begin again with nothing worse against him than a fright he had finally been brave enough to end, and Selina Marlowe, rising from her chair with her colour entirely restored, said, into the settling quiet, "I withdraw any claim my family believed itself to have on this house's arrangements, Your Grace, and I am glad to do it, because I would not wish to be a woman who married into a fraud she had only failed, by luck, to help expose, which won her from Lady Marchmont a look of unexpected and lasting respect that would follow her through the rest of this story." The room emptied slowly, the way rooms do after a storm has broken, and left everyone briefly unsure what ordinary conversation sounds like. And it was in the library's returning quiet, with the wren singing its small evening scale above the window, and the 2 open boxes still side by side on the table, like a debt finally reconciled, that the Duke of Ashcombe came to stand before Verity Colborne, and did not, for the first time in 3 weeks, seem to know what to do with his own hands. "I owe you a sentence back," he said. "I have been 3 weeks composing it, and I find, now that the moment has come, that I want to say it badly and simply rather than well. Say it however it comes," Verity said. "I have had a great deal of practice hearing your sentences badly delivered." The ghost of his laugh again, fuller this time, unguarded, I said, at Lady Harwick's ball, that I would not waste a season on you. I said it loudly enough to be overheard, because Vane had let it be known that week that he meant to use whatever regard I showed you as a lever against your father's name, and mine both. And I believed, wrongly and with a great deal of cowardice dressed up as strategy, that the cruellest thing I could say publicly was the safest thing I could do for you privately. I was not protecting you from a season, Miss Colborne. I was protecting a season I had already decided I wanted to spend on no one else, and I spent it badly instead, at your expense, and I am sorry for it in a way 3 weeks of quiet penance in a workshop has not yet fully paid. You have been very industrious with your penance, she said, and found her voice was not entirely steady after all. I did not waste that season, he said. I have spent every one since thinking of little else, and I mean to spend all the rest, if you will permit it, in considerably better company than my own regret. I once told you I had made a study of not being seen, Verity said. It was the only skill poverty ever taught me that I was glad to have. You will not go unseen again, the Duke said. Not by me. Not by anyone in this county who has heard what was done to your father's name this morning, and undone in the same hour. I am asking you to marry me, Verity, not because it settles any account left open between us. Every account between us is settled, your father's name is clear, Vane is gone. There is no debt left for either of us to discharge by it. But because I find I would like, for the whole of my life, to be the man who looks for you first in every room I enter, and I would rather ask for that plainly than dress it up in any further doorway sentiments. That, she said, smoothing the seam of her glove one last time, though her hands, she noted with some surprise, had gone entirely calm, is a considerably better sentence than the first one. I have had a great deal more practice with locks than with declarations. I am told the second gets easier with use. Then you had better use it again, she said, so that I may be certain I heard it right the first time. He did, and this time there was no hedge of lilies between them, no doorway, no audience, but a wren singing its last notes of daylight above the library window, and the sound of an old woman down the corridor informing anyone who would listen that she had known it since the scullery window, and had in fact wagered on it in the servants' hall pool herself, at considerably better odds than 3-1. They were married quietly that November, in the small stone church at Faramir rather than in London, with no more than 30 guests and Lady Marchmont weeping loudly and without shame through the entire register, having declared beforehand that she intended to enjoy the wedding of the only relation who had ever taken her advice and married well by it. Sir Josiah Bellamy stood as a witness, and within the year oversaw the bank's formal public retraction of every charge against Thomas Colborne, his name restored in the same ledger that had once condemned him, his modest grave given a new stone that named him, at last honestly. Selina Marlowe, true to the dignity she had shown in the library, refused 2 further mercenary matches her father proposed, and instead, the following spring, took up the management of a girls' charity school with a competence that surprised everyone who had only ever seen her decorative, and was, by all later accounts, considerably happier for the change than she had ever been contemplating a coronet. Mr. Pruitt kept his position at the distant bank for 11 years without a single further irregularity to his name, and sent Verity every Michaelmas without fail, a small note of thanks she never quite knew how to answer, and always did. Of Alaric Vane there came, twice a year from the Cape, a letter of careful restitution and no further request beyond forgiveness he did not presume to ask for outright, and Verity, reading the last of these some years on, found she no longer needed to decide whether she had granted it, time, she had come to think. Granted a great many things a person need not sign for. A year, almost to the day after that first terrible ballroom sentence, the Duke and Duchess of Ashcombe stood together at another autumn ball. This one held at Faramir itself. And Verity, watching her husband cross the crowded floor toward her rather than away, thought of the hedge of lilies at Lady Harwick's, and the sentence that had once gone through her like a blade. "You are staring at me the way you once stared at a false ledger entry," Julian said, arriving at her side with 2 glasses of lemonade. Because he had never once, in a year of marriage, learned to like the punch. "I am only remembering," she said, "a duke who once told a whole room he would not waste a season on me. A great fool," he said, "who did not yet know he would spend every season after trying to prove himself wrong, and would count himself fortunate for the privilege of failing." Somewhere above the ballroom windows a wren, nesting late in the year past its custom, gave one clear falling call into the warm autumn dark, and Verity Colborne, who had made a long study of not being seen, and was, at last, entirely and happily found, laughed the way she had not let herself laugh since she was a girl with a father who told her the truth would keep, if she could only keep herself long enough to carry it. If this story warmed you the way a lit window warms a traveller still out on the road, come sit a while longer by the fire before you go. I keep the kettle on for exactly this sort of evening, and a chair that's yours whenever you want it. Tell me in the comments which sentence you'd have wanted handed back to you, and which one you'd have carried the longest before you understood its true face. I read every one, and I love knowing which line found its way into you. If you'd like a place kept for you the next time I tell one of these by the fire, stay close and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means the world to me. Sleep well tonight, and be gentle with the ones who kept your lamp lit long after you'd stopped noticing the light.